Hi, welcome to Real Progressives MMT Mondays. I'm Jeff Ginter, your host. So tonight we're going back to a Real Progressives archive. This is Ellis Winningham and Steve Grumbine. They used to do a regular Sunday show, and their shows usually run about 2 hours. So we're splitting this up. I do try to keep MMT Mondays to a maximum of an hour. Can't always do it. But with a regular 2-hour show, yeah, I can split it up. So this is part one of a show they did on the gold standard. What it is and why it's a really bad idea. So enjoy, and if you have any questions, please let us know. I'll be back at the other end. Bye-bye.
All right, folks, good evening. It is Steve with Real Progressives. Tonight, we are talking about the biggest bugaboo of them all. We're going to dive into, no, better yet, let me say it differently. We're going to dig into the gold standard tonight. We're going to try and dig up some wealth. We're going to try and dig up some gold bullion, some nuggets, and we're going to throw some nuggets of knowledge at you. Folks, without further ado, let me bring on Ellis so we can talk about the vaunted gold standard. Woo! Let's do it, man.
Gold. It's so pretty to look at, but it can be depressing.
Oh, man. Okay, so, all right. Putting away the jokes for a second. I missed you. It was terrible not having you last week, Alice. Are you feeling a little bit better at all?
No, not at all.
And yet you're still here.
Yeah, my body is collapsing as normal, as it should. But I feel better in terms of not throwing up all over the place. I don't have that problem anymore, but my spine is messed up. So.
Were you poisoned with gold by chance?
Yes, that's what it was. I had a gold bug and got into my stomach. It was so depressing. And the stomach acid was in a deflationary, depression. And
you had some real honest wealth there, right?
Yeah,
wealth of stomach.
No, we created plenty of wealth. Of course, naturally, I flushed it all down the toilet. Sad, though.
All right, so let's just talk about this for a minute. There's an awful large fetish, especially within the LOL libertarian community, and some progressives who are not really eager to have a Green New Deal. They're really more steeped in shiny objects and not progress.
Gold New Deal.
Yes, yeah, the goldie oldies, right? The
old golden oldies.
All right, so let's take a step back for a minute. Back in yesteryear, back when we had real money, monetarist, metalist is the word I'm looking for here. Yeah. I know there's the metalist versus the chartalist, etc. But talk to me a little bit about why gold was selected, what the history of the gold standard was, why we used gold as a currency, going way back.
Well, what actually happened was way back in the day, they used to take gold and silver and they'd put it into coins, and you'd have the coin itself would have an intrinsic value, and so you'd value the money based on that gold coin or the silver coin. And that was what we call pure commodity monetary system. That's not the gold standard. The gold standard came about in the 18th century, when paper, you see, became fashionable. And the reason why it became fashionable is because you'd have gold shortages or silver shortages, And so you had the only choice you had was to take your coins that you were making and put less gold or less silver in them. So what they did was they said, I've got a great idea. Let's issue paper currency, and we'll go ahead and just make that paper currency worth so much gold. And so it became the gold standard, you see. and this is the point. At this point, with the paper currency being attached to gold, is where everything starts collapsing in the modern era. All this thought All these people who think they know what they're talking about. This is where it all comes collapsing and crashing down. Paper money. You see, the paper cash. Government printing money. Printing money. You didn't hear about printing money during the Roman era. You didn't hear about printing money prior to the 18th century. But no, it's printing money. Going to devalue my dollar. Yeah. Very hard to devalue a dollar that's not on a fixed exchange regime, because what's it valued against? I love going up to people and saying, quick, tell me, what is the dollar worth exactly today? And they can't answer you that. It's like, well, then how do you know it's being devalued? I mean, it isn't being devalued because you can't do it. A fiat currency depreciates or appreciates because it floats. But anyway, point being is that they started running off these paper notes, and then they pegged them to gold. All right. So basically what it was the government decided that $1, okay, would be worth so many ounces of gold or so much gold dust or whatnot. Right. And that was its value. You see? So just for argument's sake, even though this would be an expensive dollar, let's just say the U.S. government said $1 is equal to 1 pound of gold. All right, that's a very valuable dollar. But the point being is that you understand that this is the value of the dollar. So if someone asks you, well, what's the value of the dollar? You could say 1 pound of gold. Okay, so if in Great Britain, the pound was worth say 2 pounds of gold versus American 1 pound, then you can see the exchange rate, how it works. You need $2 to buy something that only costs a pound. Okay, but this is a really whacked out system because you're taking this finite commodity, okay, just because people think it's shiny and pretty, and King Herod loved it, and the Egyptians adored gold, so it's really valuable. And let's just peg that to the dollar, okay, and that's what it is. That's when the government decides. It pegs it to the dollar, see, and that gives it intrinsic value. It gives this worthless piece of cash intrinsic value. You see, so the paper is worth something now. Oh boy, And people like Ron Paul have a fetish with that. They have a gold fetish.
Fetish.
Yeah, they have a fetish too, and a fetish with gold. But to facilitate understanding with your audience, basically all it is that the national government would still issue currency. It issues its own currency. So like the U.S. government, you have the U.S. dollar. All that's happening is that the U.S. government is agreeing to fix the dollar to a certain amount of gold. So it's fixing the value to a certain amount of gold. Why? Whatever. I guess you want your gold to be precious. I mean, you want your dollar to be precious. So, okay. But anyway, that's all it's doing. And that's what you call a fixed exchange regime. The government actually fixes it, not the market. The government fixes its own currency to so much gold. See how that works? And that's it.
So what is this fetish, if you will, with gold? Where does that come from? I mean, it's been around for a long time. You see these folks that fantasize and talking about ounces, and they, you can tell the guys who saunter in. Yeah, I think silver's at per ounce, and
just a goddamn commodity. And they think that gold is money. You see, and this is the problem. Gold is not a monetary instrument. All right. All right. This is very important. We should review this because we did this in a show a long time ago. We should really talk about this. A monetary instrument, okay, in order to operate as money, it requires at least 3 things. All right. You need an issuer. Okay. You need an issuer. And then secondly, the issuer has to have a face value stamped on that instrument. And thirdly, it has to promise to accept that back as payment for something, okay? The earth does issue gold. The earth is not a government. It's not an entity like a government or a human being. The earth does not stamp a face value on its gold, and the earth doesn't promise to take it back in payment for something. It's not money, Okay, people, these gold bugs, they think gold is the money, and the dollar is just this thing that counts the gold. It's like a number that counts the gold, and so they count their money in terms of gold and not the actual dollar. So when you break free of that peg and you just have this fiat dollar, that's when they start this, my money's worthless, my money's worthless, my money's worthless. This fiat dollar is worthless. Of course it is. The food, damn it. The food is what's not worthless. The car is what's not worthless. Okay, shit. I mean, why don't you go peg your car to gold, all right? I mean, shit. It's just dumb. That's basically, in my opinion, that's where they get it from. They think that gold is money. And in truth, if you go up and you talk to these people and you mention gold not being money, they freak out. And then they foam at the mouth, and then their eyes sort of roll up and they turn gray, and then they start yelling like zombies. Gold is money! Don't tell me gold is not money! Oh, brains! You know, and they go running all about, threatening to bite people. It's just crazy, man. Gold's not money. Gold's not money. Even if you have a gold coin, Steve, that's minted by the Treasury, the gold itself isn't money. It's the face value that's stamped on the coin itself. And gold is not the object of taxation. Warren Mosler would say that, and you know that's totally correct. Gold is not the object of taxation. The coin is the face value. So if the face value is $30 on that coin, that's the object of the taxation, not the gold. You see?
So back in the day, you know, even with all the discussion about how gold is the reason why our dollar had value and so forth, even then the government was the price setter. Even at that point in time, the frickin' government was the goddamn price setter, and the folks still didn't understand this. But let's talk about that for a minute, because everything I see when I look back at historical inflation, and I look at all the market crashes and bank runs and all the other insanity that came with the gold standard, it was like the most chaotic time ever. Like, I mean, we're talking about real serious, scary shifts, swings like this.
Yeah.
What is it about that is remarkably attractive to these people, or do they just not do any homework? I mean, for real, I'm not joking. I don't understand.
I don't understand. Like I said, they think that gold is money. Okay, and what they fail to understand is that the government, even in a gold standard, even during the gold standard, the government is still the currency issuer. You understand? The whole point. Look, the whole point behind this gold standard. Before we get into how it works, how the gold standard works, and you'll start to see aha moments pop up. Because these things are applied to today's currency. But going back to during the gold standard, the government was still the currency issuer. The US government still issued the dollar, not the private sector. In Australia, the Australian government issued the Australian dollar, not the private sector. And the governments agreed to fix their currency to a certain amount of gold. Okay? The government simply constrained itself. There's no other real way to say it. By pegging to gold, the government constrained itself, its ability to spend and to address domestic unemployment and recession, because it had to manage a gold supply. You know? And people are thinking, oh, well, the gold was money. And in reality, what's common with the gold standard is that you end up, which we'll talk about in a little bit, is the recessionary and deflationary biases that would occur because of trade. Yeah, so people tend to look at it and say, oh, well, it's not the gold, it was the government overspares, the government doing it. It's always government meddling in the market. And the market's sovereign, the market's beautiful and it's perfect in every way. And the government sticks its finger in there, and the next thing you know, the whole thing's ruined and we get a recession. That's not it at all. The gold had everything to do with it, all right? And that's because, I'll say it out loud for all of the trolls who are watching, the dollar, the pound, Okay, the yen is infinite. Okay, gold is finite. Okay, so you can run out of gold in a gold standard, but the US government could never run out of US dollars. Just because it had a gold supply to maintain does not mean it would run out of US dollars. Doesn't mean it would go broke in terms of US dollars, it go broke in terms of gold. So the gold standard would collapse. Just that simple.
Wow. I mean, right now, the limiting factors, I mean, I understand, just like with anything, I assume that too much of anything at any given time could possibly lead to cancer or whatever. But the idea that fiat currency, the only good thing for it is it allows for wars. Never mind the fact that it allows for single-payer health care. Never mind the fact that it allows for green energy. Never mind the fact that it allows us to be free of any kind of death throes that nations around the world do with a commodity-based thing. If they want to go ahead and lock down on something, the petrodollar, fuck them, we got it. We can shift out to green energy like that. I mean, these people don't recognize the fact that if we don't have enough gold, we're going to war for gold, or we have to go ahead and strip them out for gold, or we have to do something stupid for gold.
Really stupid.
I mean, the pollution for mining gold is epic. The destruction of the environment for mining gold is epic.
Try to imagine, Steve, an army of unemployed workers, say about 10 million workers, okay? And the government says, we need you. And they employ all these workers and they send them up to Alaska with little tin pans, and they're panning in the rivers and streams for gold to back the currency. That's some stupid shit, if you think about it for just a minute. So,
It scares me every time I think about it. The idea here is, okay, but before we get any much further, I want to just point blank say, I took an awful lot of economics in college, and it didn't mean a hill of beans to me. I mean, I read it, I learned it, it was like great, and moved on. And it didn't really hit me until I started thinking about what kind of country that I wanted, what kind of life I wanted for myself, much less now that I have 9 kids to worry about, what kind of world I wanted them to inherit. And when you think about what these kinds of scenarios enable, disable, etc., I want my kids in a society where they're not concerned with our ability to get health care. I want them in a society where they're not concerned about having to go in debt because they've got cancer. I want them in a society where they don't have to worry about going into bankruptcy over student loans, and on and on and on. The entirety of the progressive movement is not going to, none of it is possible under the gold standard, and these folks just don't frickin' get it. So anytime I see somebody begging for gold, I realize they are not in any way, shape, or form a progressive, or if they are, they're just not a very smart progressive. Because anything that we're talking about, the Green New Deal, is literally impossible on the deflationary, stifling gold standard. And worse yet, because you're pegged like that and you're limited, money naturally pools at the top. So you have a stifled, pegged currency like that, and you want to talk about us really getting screwed? There you go. Anyway, I just wanted to get that out of the way.
That leads into what we need to talk about, how the gold standard works.
Let's do it.
But where you say money pools at the top, it pools with the rich people. Well, when it does that, then you, as an activist, look, there are some issues. There are some things during like progressive ideas like universal health care and whatnot that are totally possible under a gold standard. The only problem is what you just said. The money pools at the top and the government can only spend so much. So what happens is you have to tax the rich at a sufficient rate in order to move those dollars back into circulation so that they can be spent on something else, and you're very limited. So while if you went for universal health care, that's one thing, but you're going to have all sorts of taxes that have to be raised from everybody. And it's just silly. The point here that people need to understand is that the US dollar, the Australian dollar, the Canadian dollar, the Japanese yen, the British pound, it starts out fiat. Even if you ignore for just a moment the gold standard, ignore all that, it starts out as fiat. And then you go and attach gold to it, it becomes not fiat. You understand what I mean? So currency, it doesn't have a natural state, but currency in its most expansive, flexible state is fiat. And then you can begin going down the tubes, starting with gold, Bretton Woods, gold standard, get all the way down to bimetallism, to the point where you're so constrained you can't do anything. All right. So the point is that when a currency is fiat like today, the only constraint for the government in question, whichever national government we're talking about, is the real resources and the potential of the economy. That's it. So once you reach that point with the fiat currency, you go no further. If you go further, you're going to get inflation. So what you want to do is you want to always look for ways to change your output, more towards sustainability. If you move towards sustainability, you get a more expansive area to grow in, you see. So when you constrain it with gold, then you get the story that people have been feeding the public now for years about how fiat currency works. On the one hand, they say the currency is fiat, and they say that's bad. But then, on the other hand, they tell you that a fiat currency works exactly as though the dollar works on the gold standard, and it doesn't. And so when we begin to talk here about how the gold standard works, your audience will probably get some aha moments. And they'll say, oh yes, I've heard that before. And sooner or later, they're going to come to this realization when the light bulb comes on, it says, I already know about the gold standard. I already know how the damn thing works. I have no idea how fiat currency works. And that's the funny thing about it. I would wager that 98% of Americans right now know how the gold standard works. They just don't know how fiat currency works.
Exactly.
And that's what's hilarious about the whole thing. So if we went back to the gold standard, everybody would be right.
That is absolutely spectacular. So, but this is, so we're going to be telling them a lot of things they already know, but need to unknow.
Right. We're going to be telling them things that they already know, but it's going to cause them to go like that, because it's like, oh, I already know this. I already know this, but then wait, I don't realize how our own dollar works today. That's the shit I need to learn. Exactly. And if we go back to the gold standard, you have nothing to learn.
So let's make sure we contrast things throughout here, because the aha moments need to happen. For me, whenever this stuff comes up, I get literally repulsed inside, because it is like a roadblock to anything meaningful being set up to that. Like all scanners are turned off, all synapses stop firing. It's just gold, and there's no getting past it, and it literally is progress killing. So let's make sure we do the compare and contrast this week.
Yeah. So here's how a gold standard works. Like we stated in the beginning, the government would take its own currency, and then it would agree to fix it to a certain amount of gold. So for our purposes tonight, we're going to have a really valuable dollar. Okay, it's going to be $1 equals 1 pound of gold. And the reason why is just so that we can easily facilitate understanding without having to deal with fractions and all that stuff. People sitting there going, we're just going to do 1 pound. So 1 is 1. All right, so let's say the government says $1 is worth 1 pound of gold. All right, that's what we call the fixed exchange rate. Okay, and the government has to agree to maintain that fixed exchange rate. All right. So here we go. We're going to get the gold standard going now, get the gold bugs happy. Here's how the gold standard works. In order for the government to value $1 at 1 pound of gold, it's going to need a gold supply. See? It's going to have to go out and find gold and make some ingots and start storing them up in Fort Knox. Okay. So let's assume that the US government has 600 billion pounds of gold on hand. Great. Fabulous. Remember, the government said the fixed exchange rate is $1 to 1 pound of gold. Okay. For this system to work, the government will also have to agree to give Steve Grumbine a pound of gold for every dollar that Steve Grumbine gives the Treasury. See, has to be able to stand ready to hand over gold for the dollars. Okay, that's the only way the gold standard can work. That's why you need that fixed exchange rate. So, at 1 pound of gold for $1, I can go to the U.S. Treasury, give them $1, and they will give me a pound of gold. Now, we're starting with 600 billion pounds of gold. What does this mean then? Well, at that fixed exchange rate, the U.S. government can only introduce $600 billion into the economy. Not anymore. It can only go up to $600 billion and no further, because it has to exchange $1 for a pound of gold. And it only has 600 billion pounds of gold. So you can only have $600 billion max. All right? Now, that's all that everybody gets to play with. 600 billion. All right, now, how does the government maintain that, defend that gold supply? Because it can't let it run out. It can only do, it has to spend, right? Government's going to have to spend. It's got to do that. How's it going to defend the gold supply? Well, it has to spend a special way. Light bulb moment number 1. It has to tax. When it taxes, it takes dollars out of the economy and then recycles them back in. So for the government to spend, it dips down into the economy, taxes, say, 50 billion out, and then it respends that 50 billion on something. See how that works? Now, when it does that, there's still 600 billion in the economy. It didn't go up or down, didn't change. The base money supply didn't change, right? Right? So 600 billion in the economy, it taxes 50 billion away. There's 550 billion left in the economy. The government goes and spends 50 billion. Guess what happens? 600 billion again. See, nothing changes. It's not increasing the supply of money, of US dollars, right? Okay, now what if it wants to deficit spend? Uh-oh. This means it's got to spend more than it can collect in tax. Oh, how's it going to do this, Stephen? Well, it's going to have to issue a thing called a treasury bond. See, light bulb moment number 2. The treasury bond absorbs more dollars out of the economy, and then the government spends those, and the people hold on to the bond certificate saying, you owe me, don't forget to give me my money back. And the government says, don't worry, we will take care of that. You can trust us, we'll pay you back. It's a 30-year bond, so wait 30 years and get it back. So the government goes and it spends the 50 billion it can tax, and it spends the other 50 billion that it collected in bonds. 500, so when it did that, there was 600 billion to begin with. Now there's 500 billion. It puts that money back, and it's 600 billion again. Guess what? The gold reserves are defended. That's the only way it can spend. It can't just go in there and increase the amount of dollars. You see? It has to keep it consistent with the gold supply at that fixed exchange rate, because people are going to come to it and say, look, here's $1, give me the gold. And then the gold supply drops. And if it did that, then it also has to reduce the supply of dollars available, because you can't run out of gold. It's very important, So you got 2 light bulb moments there. The government must tax and borrow to spend in a gold standard to defend the gold reserves.
I got to tell you a funny one, Ellis. There's this group out there. A lot of people like them because they've got a really cool name. It's called Inspire Bank Exits, okay? And they did a show the other day saying, they went to the UN. They had somebody at the UN. They were going to speak at the UN to tell them that the United States has been bankrupt since 1934. We're bankrupt, Ellis. I don't know if you realize that we have no resources whatsoever. The United States has been bankrupt since 1930. And so they got this really cool name, Inspire Bank Exits. But they're inspiring really, really ignorant, economic logic. And unfortunately, because they're inspiring, they're also inspiring new converts to really, really, really ignorant thinking. And that's a shame. They're probably good people. They probably got great sensibilities. They're just economic illiterati.
I don't know. You know, it's true that the government suspended gold convertibility in the 30s. That's because the gold standard itself is stupid. It can't work. It's not functional. I mean, it only works for a short period of time until there's a problem. And then every single time there's been a war or a problem, the governments would suspend the gold standard so they could deal with the problem. And then they go back to it like idiots, okay, after the problem was resolved. Well, why are they doing that? Maybe the gold standard is not such a good idea. You ever think of that? Okay, so, you know, we've already explained that taxing and borrowing is very important to a gold standard dollar. Gotta have that, because you have to defend the gold reserves. The question now for the light bulb moment is, what is a fiat dollar pegged to? What's the commodity? What's today's dollar pegged to? What standard is today's dollar on? No one can answer that because there's nothing. There's nothing pegged to it. So there's nothing to defend.
What do you mean by defend?
Defend. Exactly that. Defend. Just like you have to protect. You have to protect your gold supply. The only way to protect it is to tax and borrow in order for the government to spend. If the government were just to start printing money, which it would do in the gold standard, if it wanted to spend without taxing and borrowing, it just wanted to, what would happen is it would be increasing the number of dollars in circulation, okay, beyond the fixed exchange rate. So remember, if the fixed exchange rate was $1 for 1 pound of gold, and we started with 600 billion pounds of gold, if it injected 800 million total, you've obviously got a 200 billion or 800 billion, you've got a $200 billion shortfall here of gold, worth of gold, right? So you're going to be short 200 billion pounds of gold. If everybody wanted to turn in their dollars, the government would need to come up with 200 billion pounds of gold because it's going to be short. See? So it can't just keep increasing the number of dollars in circulation. It has to keep them the same in order to defend those gold reserves. So as the gold reserves drop, whether it's through conversion, when people come and say, give me my gold, you know, or whether a foreign nation, whether they're settling a trade imbalance, a trade payment with a foreign nation, when the gold reserves begin to drop, the number of US dollars in circulation have to drop, you see? Or the government could devalue the dollar. Yeah? What it could do is just declare a new fixed exchange rate, where now $1 is not worth a pound, it's only worth half a pound. Well, if it's only worth half a pound of gold, then what can the US government do? It can add twice as much currency. It's devalued.
Okay. All right. All right. So take us to what happened with the Bretton Woods Accord. You know,
we have to get through the trade thing, and it'll take us straight in there.
Let's do it.
Yeah, you see what the gold standard would do is it would put pressure on nations that were poor in trade. Like, consider the U.S. government is a pretty muscular government there, and it's a pretty muscular country. It's got great production potential, you know, and everybody wants to do business with. Everybody wants American products, blah blah blah. Okay, well, that's all well and good, but then you have another country over here that does business with the U.S. that doesn't have much to offer. You know, it's got a very weak trading position. Okay, well, it's on the gold standard too, so it has to maintain gold reserves. Well, if it's running a trade deficit with the U.S., this means that it's perpetually shipping gold to the United States to settle international payments, these international trade payments. The U.S. government is collecting the gold, okay? So it can print more currency. It can add more currency out there, right? But this other government that has the weak currency, what's happening is, because of its trade position, it's constantly losing gold. So it's constantly having to reduce its own monetary base, its own monetary supply. It's got to reduce the supply of its own currency. Unemployment then begins to rise. See that? and deflation sets in. But it's not just, oh, it's just for a few days and we'll be fine. No, see, because you had to put gold in the boats and ship them across the sea. No, and if this country suddenly had, oh, well, I'm running a surplus with this country over here so I can get some gold coming in. It might take a month or something for the gold to arrive. During that time, the nation running the trade deficit with the US is going to have to experience unemployment and a deflationary environment. And in most cases, these nations, when they have weak trading positions, they're not able to run surpluses with much anybody. The gold reserves keep dropping. The currency supply keeps dropping. And it imposes a recessionary bias on these particular nations. So they perpetually have high unemployment. They perpetually experience deflationary environments and political unrest. And really the only way these countries can deal with that is to inject more currency into their domestic economies. And they can't if they're on a gold standard, because if their gold supplies are dropping, they either have to devalue their currency so they can inject more, or they've got to come up with gold. I got to have more gold or I can't inject more currency. And the people are in the streets going, little red cookbook, little, and the government's freaking out, But meanwhile, here's the United States with a pipe in its mouth going, yes, very wealthy. I'm feeling very rich today. Huh? All right, that's no way to operate world economies. There's no way to be neighborly either. It's kind of a vicious system, right? So Britain is like freaking out coming up towards World War II. And it says, screw it, can't do it anymore. It leaves the gold standard. I can't do it anymore. I'm running out of gold, literally. Can't do it no more. So Great Britain says, fuck it, I quit. All right? Then the United States says, oh, we're having a depression. Well, we have to quit. So they quit. And essentially, the government just begins spending. All right? Well, here comes World War II. And we get to World War II, and we prove that full employment is totally possible with deficit spending, making the neoclassicists look like idiots. But then guess what? The end of World War II came, and the United States came out superhero. Uncle Sam is a superhero. He's the strongest nation in the world. Yes, see my muscles. And everybody decided it would be fun to go to a little place in New Hampshire called Bretton Woods. And there they would try this gold standard thing again, only they do it a bit differently. Okay? It was more or less a dollar standard, if you will, than a gold standard, a gold exchange standard. And so at Bretton Woods, they agreed that what the U.S. government would do was the U.S. government would do the gold thing. It would peg its dollar to gold, and it would do at $35, so forth and whatnot. And the other nation, what they would do is instead of collecting gold, they would collect dollar reserves. See? And the government of the United States would just deal with the gold. All right. So what the foreign nation like France would do is it would come over here and it would exchange, it would sell its gold to the US, and then the US government would give it dollars. And then it would exchange its currency for those dollars and then spend more of its own currency into its economy to address domestic unemployment and whatnot, and everything's happy until the same damn thing started happening again. And you say, what is that? What is the same damn thing that was happening again? Well, it was the recessionary bias, the deflationary bias that started up again. You say, well, how did that start up? Well, Bretton Woods forced all of the governments that were involved in the system to observe a fixed exchange parity yet again. Guess what happens? If a government begins to deficit spend to address domestic unemployment issues, well, it's going to end up flooding the foreign exchange market with its currency. That's going to throw the exchange parity way out of whack. That would cause the central bank of that nation to automatically go in and suck up, it would mop up all that excess currency just to bring the exchange rate back in balance. And that would totally undo all of the deficit spending, and unemployment would begin rising again and deflation would set in. So nations with weak trading positions, once again, were forced to suffer high unemployment and recessionary biases. And they were like, you know what? I can't do it. Fuck it. And they started leaving the Bretton Woods system. And then Japan started rising up. And it was a pretty tough trading partner. It was becoming an economic power. World War II is doing really well. And Nixon's trying to prosecute war in Vietnam. And you got a little bit of inflation going on. And suddenly the gold reserves start falling in America because Japan's doing so damn well. Says, stop. Can't do it no more. And he suspends gold convertibility in 1971. And never does anything else. He just leaves it the way it is. So since 1971, or 73 actually, there's not been anything pegged to the US dollar. The US dollar has been allowed to float on the market freely, okay? Which means that its exchange rate is determined by market forces now, supply and demand of currency, not some bit of gold, okay? It's inconvertible, meaning that if you go to the US Treasury and say, here's a dollar, it'll give you another dollar. That's it. It is a free-floating, inconvertible fiat currency. And what that basically means is the constraint now is not some gold supply. The constraint now is how much the economy can actually produce before inflation will set in. And the US, having massive resources, massive real resources, the US has a very, very long way to go before it taps that out, you see. And when you look, like we were talking the other day, when you look at the U6 numbers, which aren't completely accurate, but it's the best we've got so far, at 9.2%, that's near depression level figures. We've got a lot of room to move with employment and with underemployment going on. So, you know, our production capability is just laying there, doing nothing. It's just doing fuck all, all right? Our infrastructure is crumbling. People are unemployed long term. People have low wage underemployment jobs. And you're worried that the government spending $1 trillion on infrastructure is going to cause inflation? Yeah. $1 trillion ain't going to be enough to get the patient out of bed. It's still going to be laying there going, it'll be conscious and awake. And you'll say, what's your name? And it'll say, my name is Steve Grumbine. Okay. And you give it $1 trillion and you say, all right, well, Steve, how do you feel? Who are you again? Where am I? Oh, we've got a long way to go. Need about $40 trillion total here to get this thing going. But, you know, my point is that if you want to hit demand pull inflation with a fiat currency, it depends on the resources now of the nation in question, not some gold supply. It depends on the real resource capacity, right? It's real simple. When the private sector has hired every last bit of labor that it can obtain, and labor is working full time, all right, and no more federal spending can result in increased output, that's it. You're all done. But then again, that would be a condition of prosperity, wouldn't it? And that's what a US dollar is for, at least from the private sector's perspective. It's a way to obtain food, a way to obtain goods and services, a way to produce, and a way to consume what we produce. Okay? It's real simple. There's nothing dangerous about a fiat currency. It's actually liberating. But people want to apply the gold standard to it. Go to tax and borrow. And if the government doesn't, it can print money. This is something happened in the 20s. All right, days are over.
Yeah, I mean, how you think about it, it's like one of the concerns I have earlier today, for example, in this exact scenario, people try to confuse when we're talking about modern monetary theory and we're discussing the gold standard and fiat and so forth. They're missing the point that we're not telling you to do anything. We're describing the way currency works. Right now, we're using MMT to describe the gold standard because that's what it does. It describes currency. Mm-hmm. There are times we're discussing fiat currency like we've been tonight as well, and that's describing currency, and that is MMT. When you start saying we can go ahead and have a federal job guarantee, now you're talking about a political decision. It's a good one, and it is foundational. But the point is that is a macroeconomic political decision. What we're talking about is straight truth. This is not like up for debate kind of It's like,
yeah, to clarify, what I'm saying is when I tell you that under a gold standard, the government had to tax and borrow in order to spend, what I'm telling you is reality. It's just, that's the way it is. And when I tell you in today's fiat dollar, the government does not tax and borrow, it does not collect tax dollars or borrow from the private sector and then respend that money. I'm telling you a statement of fact. That's reality, because there is no gold standard. The only reason why the federal government will collect tax dollars and then respend them is because it's trying to defend something. Do you understand? It's trying to defend something. In this case, during the gold standard, it would be trying to defend the gold supply from running out. And the only way you can do that is to keep the level of currency in circulation consistent with the fixed exchange rate and the gold supply at that fixed exchange rate. So there's nothing in a fiat currency that requires tax dollars to be respent by the government. So it does not do that. In fact, operationally, it can't. There's just no way. It doesn't work that way. Once the government spends, it's creating money. Or, you know, in the gold standard, people, it's printing money. But what it's doing is it's actually creating dollars when it spends. And when it taxes, it's actually just recalling dollars that it once spent into existence. It's destroying them. That's just how it works. Every dollar spent by the federal government when it goes to spend, every dollar is a brand new dollar. It never came out of anyone's pocket. Okay? Every dollar that comes out of somebody's pocket is destroyed if it's collected in tax. As far as bonds are concerned, same thing. The gold standard rules don't apply to a fiat currency. It works completely differently. When the US government issues a treasury bond, all that happens is when you bid on it and you buy it, the government simply shifts your dollars from a reserve account to a securities account. And they sit there and stay there at the Fed. In other words, what it's doing is just removing dollars temporarily from the economy. Should it be doing this? Absolutely not. Because in a fiat system, treasury bonds are used to defend a certain interest rate, a target interest rate. If the government wants to see a particular target interest rate, it will issue treasury bonds, and the central bank will collect those bonds and then drain excess reserves in order to defend that target interest rate. Okay? Beyond that, they act as savings accounts. The government doesn't spend any of the money that it's given when it auctions off bonds. They just sit there. It's just sitting on a spreadsheet. There's numbers on a spreadsheet. And when the maturity comes, the government just shifts them back to your bank's reserve account and credits your personal bank account. You got your money back. That's it. So it's all a waste of time. You know, bonds are an outdated thing. Like we were talking it was a few weeks ago, we were talking about having treasury bonds in a fiat system is like putting one of those engine cranks from a Model T Ford on a Ferrari. I mean, what's the fucking point of that, you know? That's what a treasury bond is. It's a useless appendage. It's totally useless.
you know, one of the things that I think is interesting about this gold standard discussion is that many on the left, when I go to the left, I am, you know, normally I would consider myself somewhere over there. Then I hear this stuff and I scratch my head and I say, no, they're regressives. They're not even progressives. They are regressives. And what they're saying is that they want to slow everything down. They literally want to bring everything to a crawl.
Yeah, they believe that if you take the consumption, right, and you tell everybody, let's stop consuming, let's cut our consumption down, we'll really hurt the capitalists. And this will cause them to go bankrupt, and then we'll take over and have a class war. The stupidity of that is very simple. It's based on the fundamental premise of macroeconomics. Somebody's spending is somebody's income. Okay? You have to have consumption. Just because people are buying more televisions, or people are wanting to buy more Xbox Ones, or people are going to want to buy this or that or the other, it's got nothing to do with the reason why our economy is in a sorry state. People buy too much. They consume too much. That's why we're in a sorry state. No, it's not. That's how dollars circulate. Okay? The problem is that when government policy, which is bad to begin with, when it's macroeconomic policy is very bad, and it doesn't understand, and it behaves as though it doesn't understand how the dollar works. Dollars begin to pool with the rich. And then, after you've moved a significant amount of GDP to the rich through wage suppression and union busting, years of wage suppression, okay, and you've moved all the national income to the rich, and then you start throwing private debt on the populace to sell production, it's just making the rich even more rich. And then you say, oh, by the way, here's some tax cuts too. Now you can keep everything you stole. All right, that's the problem, not the fact that people are buying iPads and iPhones. That's how an economy works. That's how a monetary economy works. How a monetary economy doesn't work is the government purposefully allows the rich to transfer all GDP to themselves and then gives them a tax break so they can keep it. You see?
Yeah, so, it's interesting. Emil Kemp is one of our longtime followers, and he's a good, real progressive. And he makes the point. And I want to make sure that we can clear this up, because I like what he's saying, but I want to make sure he doesn't conflate that with economics. When they talk about consuming less stupid shit, less garbage, that's a consumer's decision. That's our decision, what we spend our money on. So once you spend your money on crap, then all of a sudden it incentivizes people to buy more crap. Now the crap is a choice. We can choose to buy different things. We can choose where we spend our money. I mean, that is a microeconomic issue, not a macroeconomic issue. And what we do at a macro level, I think, is very important, because ultimately the pain and suffering that you see today, even in this modern economy, is completely and utterly a political choice.
Yeah, but it has nothing to do with consumption, though.
That's right.
I mean, no, it's a choice. I mean, if I want to buy something, first of all, who's the arbiter of stupid crap? I need to know who that person's name is, so that he or she needs to publish a list of what is officially stupid crap and what's not. Because I think iMacs are pretty fabulous, but there are people I've met that think iMacs are complete shit and they're stupid crap and they're overpriced. So, what's actual stupid shit? Now, if you want to talk about oil and fossil fuels, yeah, it's stupid shit. But again, this is a government decision, is it not? This is a government's decision not to start switching to sustainable energies, right? The government's making the decision. Okay, so the government's making the decision for everybody to be stupid. Well, I'm going to put I'm going to put gasoline in my car because I've got to take my son to the doctor's tomorrow. All right, should I just protest and say, screw it, I'll walk in 30 miles? I mean, come on. I'm forced to do stupid shit. What else do you want me to do? All right. But when it comes down to perfect example, someone asked on a couple of shows, maybe 3 or 4 shows ago, I want to know what kind of tea Ellis is drinking. Well, it's Earl Grey, and it's made by a company called Stash. Okay, I happen to like that. Well, there are people who think that Stash tea is stupid shit. Okay, well, I need to find the arbiter of what's stupid shit is, so that I don't make the mistake of buying stupid shit. This is a personal choice. If I want to buy it, I can buy it. All right.
Well, I think there's a fair statement and I think you would agree with this based on your environmental perspective, is the idea that products out there, number one, our government does have the capacity to regulate what garbage is brought into our nation. And the second thing is, we as consumers need to be aware of the garbage that we're putting out there, because a lot of this stuff, number one, is not biodegradable. It's very harmful. It's built for, what is this, planned obsolescence. So in no time at all, it ends up in a landfill. And you look, for example, our old computers. I mean, they have gold all through them, all kinds of other toxic stuff. We ship it over to China. China's got these huge landfills, and there's these kids with 3 eyes on their head and friggin' 4 arms wading through the piles of garbage.
Yeah, that's different, though. That's different than,
But I want to make a point, and this is like a non-economic point, but an environmental point that sometimes people conflate, and I want to be gentle about it because I share their sensibility. I just want to make sure we don't conflate economics with that. And the fact is that is an environmental disaster. And
it is.
It's on us as people to prevent that from happening. I just wanted to make that point. That's
right. No one's saying that there aren't bad products out there that are damaging and people are making stupid choices. What I'm talking about is just, you'll notice that there's what I'm talking about and what you're talking about, two different things. I'm talking about a group of people that are on the far left that have developed this notion that anything beyond the basic necessities is feeding the capitalist. You know, so if I buy an iPhone, I'm feeding the capitalist. And dude, struggle. We got to stop buying cell phones, stop buying iMacs, stop getting a broadband, stop doing anything to feed the capitalist, bring the system down. I mean, you don't understand how an economy works. All right, it's my choice if I want to buy Stash Tea or if I want to buy an iMac. Now, when it comes to environmental disaster things, you can argue, well, you know, it's government should be doing something about it, but ultimately that's going to fall on the people's shoulders themselves, because you're sitting here and you're voting for it, okay? Because you're playing a political game. You say, oh, well, a vote for so-and-so is a vote for Trump. A vote for Stein is a vote for Trump. We can't have that. Let's vote for Hillary. La, la, la. You're playing that game, and meanwhile, you've got children with 3 eyes in China running around in a landfill that's toxic. Because you're allowing this. So as far as consciousness is concerned of the people, when it comes to dangerous things, there's no problem whatsoever with people saying, no, stop buying this. And you've seen them try to do it. There's no, like with the GMOs, for instance, there's no evidence whatsoever that GMOs are good for you. Okay. And it's hard to say whether or not they're bad for you. So at least the one thing that we could do is just put a label on your product that says this thing contains GMOs. So the people that don't want to buy GMO foods don't have to, you see. But you get pushback from the corporations, and Monsanto said, no, they should not know what they're buying. Well, that's pure evil, man. That's so this is a different situation. And it does play into economics to some extent, but these are political decisions that people, I would say, on the whole, the populace, people need to get their minds straight about certain things. GMOs are harmful. They might be, they might not. Nobody knows whether or not they are. So at least let's have some labels. All right. Well, if the corporations are going to push back, then that tells you all you need to know right there. And people need to start using common sense. Dollars before health? I don't think so.
Right.
Hi, welcome back. I'm Jeff Kinter. What did you think? Do you have any questions about the gold standard? Do you have any questions about why we taxed and borrowed on the gold standard and why we tax and borrow on fiat currencies? It's kind of the same thing, as Ellis points out. When you're taxing to defend something. You are borrowing to defend something. Under the gold standard, you taxed and you borrowed, for a variety of reasons. I mean, we all know that taxing is the first and most important thing to drive the currency, to make sure it's valuable. They tax you to make sure that you will demand that currency. They don't tax you in that currency. You can say, thank you very much. No, I don't really need US dollars. I can do anything else I want. But you have the tax obligation. You don't pay in US dollars. You're going to go to jail. So now you need the currency. But beyond that, on a gold standard, they have promised to exchange your dollars for a certain amount of gold. So however much gold they have, there's a limit to how much currency they can create and have in circulation. So they will tax and borrow to drain you of cash to make sure that they don't have too much cash in circulation to defend their gold supply. Now, they tax and borrow to defend a target interest rate. In each case, the federal government always has the power to determine the size of the money supply, how much currency they will create, either directly themselves or through the banking agencies. There's a lot of talk about how the money supply is controlled by the population and the demand for it. Yes, but we can put credit controls, we can put all manner of restrictions about how much banks can lend if we really want to be able to curb that. There are options, always options, but we have to understand that on a gold standard, we did need to tax and borrow to afford things. Not because we didn't have the stuff, not because we didn't have the resources, but because the federal government tied its hands behind its back and said that this is how much money we shall put into circulation and no more. Because they arbitrarily chose to tie their currency to a commodity. So anytime there was a problem in the real economy, anytime there was a depression, anytime there was a war, anytime they had to spend big, they suspended gold convertibility. And then, stupidly, went back on it once that emergency had passed. Not until Nixon ended the Bretton Woods agreement in 1971 did we have what has now become a permanent fiat floating exchange system. And now we have the flexibility to be able to deal with whatever problems arise. We have that possibility. We only lack the political will to use it, to end poverty, to end homelessness, to end people not having access to health care, to end, you name it. We have the resources to do so much more than we are allowing ourselves to do now. We'll be back next week with part 2. Bye-bye.